Make sure that worked there. There we go. Great. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to share your time with us this evening. And we will have our speaker today. Her name is Elizabeth Moreau, and she is from Diabetes at School. And our topic is advocating for your child in school. And so, sorry, give me a quick second here, guys. And so a couple of housekeeping items just before we get started. So we would kindly ask that everyone mute themselves during this conversation, and I'll make sure that everyone is muted. And during the recording, we're actually also going to turn off everyone's camera. And so that'll just keep background noise to a minimum. And we do have a chat function. So if you hover over in Teams, if you hover over the screen, you should see a bar that shows up. And there's a little thought bubble that shows up that shows the conversation. And that's how you can ask questions in the chat. And so after Elizabeth's presentation, we'll have plenty of time for questions. And so we would ask that you type your question into the chat, and we will definitely get to as many questions as we can, time permitting. And so I do also want to let everyone know that we will be discussing the possibility of COVID-19 could come up in a general way, but we will not be making recommendations on whether or not you or your family should be going back to school. And this is a family decision, and we can touch on certain things in regards to, again, advocating and creating plans as you plan to make this decision, but we cannot answer the question for you. That's something that you'll have to make a decision for within your own family. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to Elizabeth Moreau, who is the Director of Communications and Knowledge Translation at the Canadian Paediatric Society. And she's the staff lead for Diabetes at School. And she has 2 children, the youngest of whom was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2013 at the age of 4. And so without any further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Elizabeth. And thank you so much again for sharing your time with us.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm going to start sharing my screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now? Okay, I think so.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We're going to talk about advocating for your child or for yourself if you're a teen listening in at school. Things are a little bit different with COVID. You may need to do a little bit more advocacy than in previous years. So these are very general steps to help you advocate, and also from a prevention point of view, how you can get to a place where that advocacy is a little bit easier, and really you're coming from a place of collaboration with your school. I just want to acknowledge the organizations behind Diabetes at School: the Canadian Paediatric Society, Canadian Paediatric Endocrine Group, and Diabetes Canada. So we're a collaboration of these 3 organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are the rights of kids with type 1 at school, what are our responsibilities as parents to make sure those rights are respected, and then how to advocate for your child if you run into issues. And then hopefully there's time to share some of your own experiences and solutions around advocacy. So to talk about rights, I'm going to show you a very quick video produced by Diabetes at School, because I think it does a really good job. We'll only let it run about no more than 2 minutes, and does a really good job of outlining the main rights that our kids have at school. So just let's have a look.
Type 1 Diabetes at School, Rights and Responsibilities. Like all students, children and youth with type 1 diabetes have rights at school. Above all, they have the right to be safe, supported, and included. To ensure that these rights are respected for every student, school boards, school administrators, staff, and families must work together. Every school board must have a policy on supporting students with diabetes. Let's look at what else is needed. Right to safety. Type 1 diabetes is a medical condition that needs close attention, so keeping all students with diabetes safe is the top priority. To do that, each student needs an individual care plan with details about how their diabetes will be managed during the school day. All school staff must know the symptoms of low blood sugar and what to do in an emergency. Students must be able to treat low blood sugar or have a snack whenever they need to and wherever they are. The same applies to essential tasks like checking blood sugar or administering insulin. Students need enough time to finish meals and snacks to prevent low blood sugar. Younger children may need supervision. Right to support. At least 2 staff members must be trained to provide support. Even students who are independent need help sometimes. Low blood sugar can affect a student's ability to think. If they have low blood sugar before or during a test, they may need extra time to finish. When blood sugar is high, students may need to go to the bathroom more often. They must be allowed to do this. Right to inclusion. Students with diabetes do not want to be singled out in a way that causes embarrassment or stigma. With some support and planning, they can participate in field trips, regular physical activity, and extracurricular activities. They can also be included in special events involving food or treats. Regular healthcare appointments are an important part of diabetes management and education. School attendance policies should not penalize students for taking care of their health. By working together, schools and families can ensure that students with diabetes are safe, supported, and included.
So, so that's a video that's available on YouTube, and I would encourage you to, when you're preparing your parent kit, your teacher kits, excuse me, at the beginning of the year, to send the link to that along with the educational materials, because it just gives a good overview of what we should be expecting for our kids. So some of the key questions for us. We want to know what policies are already in place to protect all kids with type 1 diabetes, because this will be a starting point for all of us at school. You want to think about what you should reasonably expect given your child's unique situation and needs, and what is the school's role versus my own role as a parent, and then what do I do when there's a problem? So let's talk a little bit about these. So when it comes to policy, these are the 2 overarching policies from health experts. So from the CPS and the Paediatric endocrinologist, and from Diabetes Canada. And the recommendations in here are what we want to see in provincial, territorial, and school board policies. Generally, these are what the experts recommend. These are on another slide that we're going to talk about in a little bit, so I'm not going to go through these in detail, and actually most of these expert recommendations were described in the video. But the important takeaway from here is that these recommendations are evidence-based, and they're recommended by health professionals. So how does policy for kids with type 1 diabetes even happen? So typically, it's different in every province a little bit, but typically the province is going to set the policy. It could be legislation, but more often than not, it's policy to establish standards across the province. These ensure some consistency and access to supports. And typically they come from the Education Ministry, although they might have some Ministry of Health involvement as well. School boards take their lead from this provincial policy and then typically develop their own policies and some mechanisms to ensure that the policies meet the local needs and the context at the local level, because rural may be different from urban and so on. And then the role of schools is to implement that school board policy, to train their staff, to work with us as families, to make sure kids get the supports that they need on the ground in school. Here are just some examples of policies across the country. And if you are in Ontario, this is the policy here in Ontario. It's also known as PPM 161. And all of the ones that I showed you are available online. There are also links from the Diabetes at School website to all of these policies. So that's the first thing you want to do, is be familiar with that provincial policy. Then you want to be familiar with your school board's policy. So, how closely is your school board's policy following the provincial policy? So the school board policy usually but not always, but usually describes the roles and responsibilities of schools and families, usually makes provision for a care plan and generally what it should include. They might mention something about daily or routine management and supports and how that happens. They might talk a little bit about emergency response and how school staff are trained. So it's important to become familiar with these documents because they let you know the minimum that you can expect from your school. So what should we expect? If you were on the webinar the other night, you saw this slide, but essentially we want, as described in the video, we want to make sure our kids are safe, supported, and included. And that involves both their diabetes management as well as making sure that, inclusion is there, that there's no stigma, that our kids are not singled out because of their diabetes, and that they're able to fully participate in everything that's going on in school. But in order to achieve that for your kids, it really needs to be a partnership, is what we've generally found to be most effective. So it really helps to go into the relationship with the school in the spirit of collaboration. And so we're asking a lot from the schools, and we may need to give up a little bit. No one is going to take care, especially when it comes to little kids, no one is going to provide the kind of care that we can as parents. And we may have to adjust our routines at school so that they're a little bit different from what they are at home. There may not be as many blood checks at school as at home. It may not be physically feasible. So we may have to give up a little bit. So think about what you absolutely need at school and what maybe you can give up a little bit. It really helps to be able to say to schools, what can I do? What can I do to help? Here's what my child needs. Tell me what I can do to help you. It may be by providing information. It may be sort of in non-COVID times. It may mean going into school every now and then. It'll look different depending on what your child needs and on what your situation is. How flexible are you to help out? You may not be able to go on field trips or be at school for different events, but what can you do to help them out? At minimum, you can provide them with lots of information. That's what Diabetes at School is here for. And you can assure them that that information is quality, credible, evidence-based, and that, a little bit of information will help them feel empowered so that they're not afraid. A lot of folks have myths about what it means to have type 1 and what the dangers might be, and they might feel a little bit intimidated about having a child with type 1 in their class. So you want to counter those myths and reduce any fear that they might have. And really to focus on your child. So focus on, the vast majority of teachers want our kids to be safe, supported, and included. So we need to go in there assuming that and let them know that, what we're doing together is ultimately going to achieve that objective. So as I mentioned, you can find all kinds of information for your teachers and school staff on Diabetes at School. Really encourage you to send them the videos. Check out the video series, send them the videos because they're short ways to get some key concepts about diabetes across. So roles and responsibilities, who does what? It will vary, depending on the situation, depending on the needs, but in general, when it comes to the individual care plan, typically that's something that we would initiate as parents and then review with the school, review maybe more than one, at least at the beginning of the year, maybe throughout the year if things change, but that's a shared responsibility right there. When it comes to having two personnel trained, it's up to the school to identify the personnel. So, will it be a teacher? It might, but it might be an educational assistant. It might be somebody in the office. It's going to vary depending on the situation. So it's up to them to identify who those people are. And it's probably up to us to do the training. If your child needs supervision, again, it's going to be up to the school to determine who will do that and how that will work. Sometimes it might be In the case of a young child, again, this might not happen during COVID times, but in the case of a young child, it might be an older child, a grade 6 in the school, who might be a lunch monitor and able to do that work. The right to check blood sugar and eat or administer insulin anytime, anywhere, it's up to the school to make that happen. So to make sure that everybody's aware that that can happen, so that there are no misunderstandings, and no one is, bothering your child or making them feel awkward because they're checking their blood sugar, or, having to give a bolus of insulin somewhere. We always want to make sure that all staff know how to recognize and treat a low blood sugar when there's a child with diabetes at school, because one never knows when a low can happen, under what circumstances. So again, it's up to the school to make that happen, to communicate that, and we as parents can provide the information so that they have what they need. You can either point them toward the video on low blood sugar. There are posters on diabetes at school that you can print out and encourage them to post in high traffic areas and staff rooms. Lots of ways to make people aware of that. And then if your child is older and they need accommodations for tests, obviously it's the school that needs to make that happen. So I go through this to really show you that it's a partnership. It's not something the school can do on their own, and these are not things that we can make happen as parents, but we can work together to make sure that they happen. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more, which is glucagon. Hopefully most of you have now a prescription for nasal glucagon that you can leave in the school. Luckily, it's an easy product to use, so we can bring that in. We can show folks how to train it. I believe that Lily has some videos on their website, again, that you could show folks. And so we just need the school to make sure that it's in a location where everyone knows how to access it. So what are our responsibilities? Well, we talked about the care plan. If your school board has a template, I would encourage you to use that. If they don't, you can go to Diabetes at School and find a template there. Communication is obviously our responsibility. You want to make sure that it happens, that it's positive, that it's respectful of the teachers and principals' realities. This year is, particularly challenging because there's so much going on at schools. So you want to acknowledge that. You want to be respectful of that. At the same time, you want to make sure that your child has what they need to be safe from the first day that they go back to school. Training is often our responsibility. It might be easier this year to do it virtually. It might be something that folks expect, so that could be a positive. You want to make sure that you are, again, being respectful of their time, and that you're providing people with the kind of information that they need to know. So you could probably talk to your gym teacher for a short period of time, and then maybe your classroom teacher might need, a little bit more of a conversation because they're with your child for the whole day. And then, of course, supplies are our responsibility to keep them, to make sure they're there and that they're well stocked. Here's the individual care plan. I'm not going to go through it in detail. Most of you are probably familiar, but just what I want to say from a preventive point of view is this is the opportunity to get everything in there, to make everything really clear from the start of the school year, so that you're not, dealing with situations midway through the school year that are causing difficulty. So the care plan should go through most eventualities, special activities and physical activity, insulin, blood sugar checks, and all of that stuff. So, think ahead as to what might be happening in the school year, what you might need, and try to do some preventative work at the beginning of the school year so that everybody's on the same page. Things don't always go as we hope they will. So if there is an issue, how do you problem solve? So I think that I always hope to prevent issues, because you want to have a good relationship with your school. Communication is key. Oftentimes, we do run into issues because of miscommunication. So just a few tips around having positive communication with your school. One is credibility, having trusted sources, and that's why we offer Diabetes at School. Context is really important. Again, we kind of, as I mentioned, we might have different We might have different expectations at school than we do at home. You might, if you have CGMs, you might set your alarms a little differently at school than you would at home. So think about what kind of makes sense there. When it comes to content, again, you want to give people information that they need, not too much information. You want to make sure that they can understand it, because most folks haven't had the kind of in-depth education that we all have had from our clinics about diabetes. So, you know, as you all know, much of what many people know is about type 2. And we know that won't be helpful in the case of our kids. Ask your school how they prefer to communicate. You know, will it be by text or by email, by phone? Might not be a lot of face-to-face this year, but it could be a FaceTime. Keep your messages simple. And I'll say it again, but I don't think we can say it enough, that you really want it to be collaborative. You really don't want this to be an adversarial relationship. And so if, you know, if you do get into a situation where you feel that you're not able to get the support that your child needs, what do you do? So first, as I mentioned, you need to be familiar with what policies are in place. So that's where you need to have, you know, what is that provincial policy? What does your school board have? And is your school following the policies? If your school is following the policies and the problem is sort of higher up, then obviously it's a different approach, right? Because the problem is with maybe with the board, not with your particular principal or school. So it's really important to know. And again, those are things you can find out before school starts. So you're able to ask what's expected of them. And if you're asking for things that aren't in a policy, then that's a different conversation with them. Who do you speak to? It's great if you can solve the problem at the school level. I think that's always better for everyone involved. It's much less stressful for you as a parent and for the school staff. So that's just kind of the hierarchy. So if you're starting with the person with whom you have an issue, you know, say someone who is working with your child, made a decision, for example, decided not to give your child a cupcake because, you know, they shouldn't have that and you didn't have a plan. So just maybe explain to them, like, you know, we can make that happen. Just give me a text and I'll tell you how many carbs to bolus for, or something like that. So try to start with, you know, with the person where the misunderstanding, where the issue is, before you go to the principal. Before you kick it up to the school board, before you kick it up to the school board, you know, the trustees. So there's that kind of hierarchy. And, you know, you'll know, I think, when it's time to move on to the next level. But if you can avoid escalating it, it's probably better for everybody involved. And then importantly, like, is this, and this goes back to the issue of policies, is this an issue specific to you? Or is it a board and a system-wide issue? So if, you know, if something is not provided for in a policy, then it's more challenging for the school to provide it to you. So if that's the issue, then you know there's a bigger problem. It's not just that your principal or your teacher is being resistant. They may just say, well, we don't have the kind of authority or empowerment to do this. So that's where you do need to kick it up a bit. And it can be super helpful to connect with other parents, either to find out sort of, well, what else is going on in our jurisdiction? Is there somebody else in my board that has this issue, or that, you know, that you can compare to? It's not super helpful to compare across provinces, but, you know, try to stay as kind of close to home as possible. So try to connect with other parents. There are a couple of, well, there are several Facebook groups. We have one here in Ontario to facilitate conversations about schools. There's one in Alberta. There's a general, at least one, and probably a lot more. This is the one that I know of. The Canadian Parents of Type 1 is a discussion group. And then, of course, JDRF is a wonderful place to get connected with other parents. And Diabetes Canada has been really active around advocacy for kids in school. So both organizations can be super helpful in terms of offering you advice, you know, helping you sort out what the issue is and what perhaps your next step should be. So yeah, so that's what I had to share. Felt like it was really quick, but would love to hear your experiences, questions, comments.
I think if anyone, as we are a little bit of a smaller group tonight, if anyone does have any questions, you can just raise your hand and we can get to you that way. Or if there's an experience that you want to share, please feel free to do so that way. And like I said, we can just do it there's a little hand up on that bar right beside the chat. So happy to do it that way if anyone would like to ask a question. All right, well, perhaps Elizabeth, I will ask you a question that I have come across. So I'm wondering if you've had any feedback in terms of technology, especially with older kids. In schools I've seen they're becoming increasingly hesitant to have cell phones. And I've heard experiences where people feel very much singled out because many teachers have to know that they're carrying this device for a specific purpose.
Right. I don't have personal experience, so I only have anecdotal experience. But yes, I've heard stories where a child's device or pump was mistaken for a pager, of all things. I mean, who has seen a pager in the last 20 years? But anyway, was mistaken for a device, and the child was reprimanded. It's very embarrassing and so on. So this is around kind of the preventative communication of making sure that all of the teachers, all of the school staff that are informed at the beginning that my child has XYZ devices and will have them with him or her. They might be on their desk. They need access to them at all times, and so on. And there are a couple of documents on diabetes at school that are about technology and that are designed for school staff so that you can, if you don't show them your child-specific devices, you can show them these handouts so that they can understand how these things work and why a student would need them on their person all the time. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And so we'll do one last call out again. If anyone would like to put either a question in the chat or raise hand for questions. And just while people, I guess, are thinking there, I will just let everyone know that we will be sending out this recording as well as materials in French if anyone would prefer those. There's some materials that are coming out in French, and we'll get those out after this recording as well. If we don't have any questions that come through here, then in the next couple seconds, I'd just like to say thank you again to Elizabeth so much for your time tonight and for providing us with this information. And again, I will pass it over if there's any final remarks that you would like to say.
No, I just thank you, Danielle. Thanks to JDRF for organizing this, and I hope everybody has a really good school year.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again, and have a wonderful night, everyone. And we will be following up with the links to this tomorrow or very shortly. Thank you so much again, and have a wonderful night.